Game Week Build Review, March 30th, Sunday afternoon. Before I get started, I got a question about what Game Week is and why I'm posting these videos. And the answer is basically this is an exploration for me into game programming. I've been writing business code, code that gets business done, I guess, for 25 years or more. And I've always wanted to get more into games and game making. So I know Ruby the best, and so starting with Dragonruby as my game engine seems like a reasonable starting point. Game Week is something that my friend Brian and I are doing basically to create little levels that are fairly disjointed. We want to experiment with different game types. One of the levels is a top-down shooter. This level here is going to be a side-scrolling cave explorer. We've got ideas for all kinds of crazy things, like an Oregon Trail style level, all kinds of fun things where we get to experiment with different game mechanics and styles, and see what pops out. If at the end of all of this we have an idea for a game that we like and we have some mechanics figured out around it, then we'll probably try to turn it into a real game. But until then, it's experimentations and trying to find the limits and then find clever ways around them with Dragonruby. This is something we also did with Pico 8 a while back. Pico 8 is a fantasy console, 8-bit style, all written in Lua. And the awesome thing about Pico 8 is its purpose is to be constrained. So it has a very limited color palette, very limited size. You have to write in Lua, which isn't a restriction by itself, but there are no libraries. So you write literally everything yourself. And that was a lot of fun. So we're doing the same thing with Dragonruby. A little bit more power. Still has some limitations though, and as I find those limitations, it's been interesting trying to find ways around them. Looking around on itch and Reddit and other sources, I haven't found examples of Dragonruby games that really knock my socks off. There are some very creative games and very interesting gameplay things and whatnot, but haven't seen a game that really made me go wow yet. And I don't know if that's because most game makers go directly to a Unity or a Love 2D or some other platform. I really don't care what they do or don't do. My purpose here is to find the limitations and have fun, explore different aspects of physics and the game cycle and areas of programming I've missed. In just doing work code forever. So yeah, my rules for myself on this, which go into why I'm making the videos, is that I can spend no more than an hour a day on this. So I've got a time box and effort. So if I want to experiment with a new thing, I really have to limit the scope so I can get something done in an hour that I'm happy with. And then instead of doing pull requests, I'm posting these videos. So in the body of all my pull requests are links to YouTube videos. And so when Brian sees my code come through, he has to watch my video. So that's kind of fun by itself. And ultimately, I love the idea of doing a stream where I, go through a problem start to end, and go through my way of debugging and figuring out how to do things. I like doing that kind of stuff. It's stuff that I've done with, as a mentor and as a mentee. So I really enjoy doing that. I really like the live aspect of working through problems with other people. I just haven't done it with strangers on a stream. So we'll see if I ever get there. I don't know, but I want to get comfortable with the idea at least. So I'm posting these videos and, hopefully somebody finds them useful in some way. If anybody out there is making games in Dragonruby and wants to figure out how to do interesting terrain, maybe what I'm doing here will help them. So that's that. Where I left off, I had the dual grid system implemented on my side scroller level, and that worked really well. It's really fast. It does exactly what I expected it to do, what I hoped it would do. The only problem is it's really chunky, and that might work really well for some games and some tile set ideas and whatnot, but it doesn't really work for the level I'm trying to make now. So I'm just going to put that on the shelf, and I've got some ideas for really interesting things that this could be used for, but for now I'm just going to put that on the shelf. And this is what I ended up with instead. As you can see, it's a lot more smooth and rocky, which is great because I'm making a side scroller cave exploring, space cave exploring game here, or level. And so I like the bumpy terrain and the general randomness of it. As you can see, it's smooth, so I can walk along the ground, whereas before with the dual grid, I couldn't. I could if I made the tiles super small, but that caused other problems. So anyway, this actually works really well. So let's go through a little bit how I did it. I've got a sprite sheet in Sprite where I basically have rows of different elevations of tiles. So the top row starts at 8, ends at 8, so it's essentially a flat terrain. I added a little variation that you can see down here, and the next set starts at 1, ends at 8, starts at 8, ends at 1, on and on. And by chaining those together, I can, let's see here, there we go, I'll take off the background. Cool. So basically I can pick a starting point, and then whichever random tile we get for our starting point, our next tile has to be compatible in that its beginning height or entry point has to be the same, has to be compatible with our exit point of the previous tile. So here, this one, it looks like it ends at 16. This one looks like it ends at 8. This one looks like it ends at 8, 8, 1, 8. And so there's a little variation in the whole thing. Now, I made a couple extra rules where if a tile ends at 16, it can go up a whole block height as long as it can pick one, a tile that starts at 1. So this could have just as easily gone down or straight or up. And I've constrained the number of levels that we can go up or down so that the map doesn't just go up and to the right, which is a funny other thing that has happened. So anyway, basically procedurally gets a tile that's compatible, puts it in, and on and on. So you can see how that draws the surface level. Now with the surface level drawn, you can see when I turn on the debug layer, you can see my collision map. And my collision map is basically a line that I'm drawing that follows the general shape of each level. So in this case, this one here is flat, so my collision is flat, and this one goes down. So anyway, you can see it follows the terrain pretty darn closely, and I like that. I like how that works. That was really elegant and simple. The other nice thing about doing it that way is when I draw my sprites when I load my sprites into the map, I can essentially do it row by row. So here's my top row that we were looking at where the entry is 8, exit is 8, and I can just load in the coordinates of that sprite on the sheet. So I can use the entry and exit here as we randomly grab tiles to also work as my collision layer. So I've got essentially 80 line segments that represent my collision layer, and from there, detecting collision along line segments is a already solved problem. So I just figured out how that worked and put it in, and that was great. So now I've got really smooth collisions that work really well, no bouncing, and we can walk along terrain if we want. This has increased friction if you're on the ground, but if you're in the air with your jetpack on, it's very floaty. So that's exactly the effect I was going for. And then I can turn on my next bit of rendering. So this will render below the line. So now I've got ground, and I think it looks halfway decent. I just whacked these tiles together in like 5 minutes, so I could very easily smooth them out a bit and spend a little bit more time on that. But being a experiment, I didn't want to take that time. Now, this works really well. I like it. It's not going to work for my level though. I hit a limitation with Dragonruby that I've got to figure out next. Basically, I would love to be able to use this texture, the shape of my ground, and use it as a mask over a graphic that I could use for terrain. This is going to be essentially, I want it to look like the surface of an asteroid, and I can't really get that with this type because my tiles would all have to mesh together in a way where my terrain would be very, very granular. It would look like sand. And I don't really want that. I want craters, I want rocks, I want all that stuff. And so I think to get that, what I'm going to have to do is essentially the inverse drawing of what I'm doing now. So instead of having my sprites drawn below this 8 to 8 line, I'm going to have to draw above and then pick a level that's safe up here and then draw down to my my collision map edge, right? So my edge will stay exactly the same as far as how it's being generated and what's happening, and my terrain will stay the same as far as how it's generating and being drawn, except that we'll go from our map point up. Underneath that, I'll be able to render on a separate canvas. I should be able to render the terrain for my asteroid. So that should work super well, and then I should probably be able to have another layer that represents my whatever my background is going to be, which is probably like stars and stuff like that. So, but I think the stars and whatnot will be simple enough that I can generate my edges all with essentially a transparent bottom edge, probably with a black top edge, and then use black with random stars and such. And I think that'll actually work really well together. I don't think anybody will be able to really see that edge. So that's the plan for the next round. This has been really fun though, and generating the terrain, there's a lot of code here that was pretty interesting. And this is, I use Cursor, and so I use a decent amount of AI. And what I found for a lot of this kind of code is that I can't ask it to write any code that's useful here. It is just really bad at everything to do with executing any of this. Instead, I have a little discussion with it as if I was talking to, the persona I have created in a prompt is essentially talking to a architect level engineer specialized in game development, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm asking it questions. I'm asking it questions like, what is the best way to detect collisions along the line? And then we talk about algorithms and implementation, and we come across this kind of stuff, and then I find examples and start writing it up, and it works. It does help at that point once I've chosen the route, but if you let the AI try to lead on any of this stuff, it's crazy how bad it is at it. So if you're in the same shoes trying to figure stuff like this out, talk to the AI like it's a really good developer you want to learn from, not like it's a tool that's going to write you any useful code, because it's not. It is wrong. It is so wrong that even on the tab completion on this kind of stuff, it was just like hallucinating. It wasn't matching the pattern at all. It was just like putting in random numbers, and I don't know where it was coming from. So like you couldn't even tab complete this basic stuff. But talking to it about specific problems and angles and trying to get to a point where it could tell me, an approach that might be interesting, or I would tell it my approach and ask it, is this a route that has been explored before, and what's wrong with it? And if you ask it what's wrong with your thought, I think it's really insightful. But You really can't let the AI lead. The AI just does not belong leading the way here. Anyway, so yeah, on the debug layer again, you can see our collision maps. You can see our elevations here, which I was really happy with. It was really nice to be able to pick a limit both above and below so that the terrain can be generated and come back down and all that. So I think once I do this next round and render from my edge up and put my ground under, I think that's going to do what I want. And then I can complete this level and probably move on to another level like Oregon Trail or some other goofy thing. So anyway, I hope this is useful for somebody, but even if not, I'm just figuring stuff out. See ya.